Welcome to this episode of It's a Fair Question, and what a treat I have in store for you, none other than Sally Magnusson, one of Scotland's best known and most loved broadcasters. We're going to be talking about Sally's career, life in general, and particularly about ageing and dementia. Sally, thank you for joining me for this edition of It's a Fair Question. Now, you're as well known to this generation as your dad was in his. People of my vintage, every single one of us knew the phrase, "I've started, so I'll finish." Tell me, what was it like growing up with your dad so well known on television? And did that give you aspirations thinking, I want to be on TV one day?
Well, in answer to the first, it was supremely embarrassing growing up with my father, so very well known, because in these days, you know, I would be maybe sort of mid-teens. Mastermind was absolutely huge. You know, there were vast audiences for it, and that catchphrase was on everybody's lips. So I would go to, you know, I would try and go to a party anonymously, as I would hope. And as soon as I was introduced as Sally Magnusson, oh, Magnusson, any relation? I've started, so I'll finish. And honestly, I could have bought them. It was, you know, you were just at that age where you were self-conscious and you just didn't want to be reminded of who your parents were all the time. And I found that a bit difficult. It didn't give me any aspirations whatsoever to go into television. And for somebody who's actually had a career that has been in the public eye, I'm actually not particularly by personality suited to it. You know, I was a reporter. I started out as a reporter, and the reason that I loved being a newspaper reporter was to be able to sit outside events and, you know, with my pen and my notebook and record, and, you know, especially feature writing, where you could put a bit of color into your writing, go back to your desk and trying to make something live for other people. And the personality of the reporter having very little to do with it. And I was very comfortable doing that. And I had no particular desire to get involved in television at all. And then I don't know if you remember the name of Nelson Gray, who was, he was actually a Church of Scotland minister who had gone into television, became a producer at STV. And he was producing a series called Into the 80s, and this is how long ago it was. And he contacted me. I had written something in the Scotsman that was about some sort of ethical issue where I had been sort of balancing it up and trying to express the complexity of the issue. And he phoned me up and he said, "Sally, I'm starting this new series. I would love you to be involved. I think you'd be great as a presenter." And I more or less said to him, "No, Nelson, I'm not interested in television." And he said, "Well, think about it." So I phoned up my dad and I said, "I've got this chance to do a television program. What do you think?" And he said, "Oh, you should do it." He said, "It never does you any harm to have another string to your bow, to learn another trade, to see if you're any good at it." And so I did that, and I found that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the directness of the communication. Curiously enough, although there's all this paraphernalia and you're actually, you know, you're talking through a camera, I found instinctively that I enjoyed and was able to imagine myself through the camera to the people I was talking to. And after that, I was invited to do more things, and gradually, and this is what television does, it began to dominate more and more until I was invited to go to London and to take over the program that was replacing the old nationwide program. It was called 60 Minutes. They were looking for new presenters for that. And from then on, that was me full-time in television. So I really can't say I aspired to it at all. And in fact, the public side of it, the celebrity side of it, I have never liked or wanted or indulged, or, you know, all that I could well have done without. But the job itself I've enjoyed. very much.
I was going to ask you about that public side of it, Sally, because you're sort of a Scottish treasure in many ways. We know you so well. You're almost a member of the family. You're so frequently before us, not least reading the news. So, how do you take to that? And you've had plenty of experience now, but you walk into Marks and Spencers or into Morrison's to do the shopping. Do you watch heads turn and just ignore it? Are you comfortable with that now?
Yeah. I'm much more comfortable actually with the face-to-face engagement with people. I mean, I love people. I love talking to people. I especially love Scotland. That sense that Scotland's a village, and that people do often just feel they know you, and it's all hello Sally, and how are you doing, and I saw you the other day, and that sort of thing, and I'm very comfortable with that. I think the side now that is dominated by social media, and that kind of, which is much less based on, to be honest, it's much less based on affection.
Mm.
There's an affection among Scots, I think, for the people that work among them and are not doing it with airs and graces. It's just a nice sense of community, whereas on social media you just feel people are out to kind of pounce on anything you've done wrong, or anything they don't agree with, or anything they think they imagine in saying you have said it because you believe X, Y, and Z, rather than the fact that you're just reporting something. All that I don't like. I don't think anybody likes.
Yeah. Most people will know you now through their television screens, but as you said, you started your career in journalism, but you've written beyond that a number of books. I noticed you've written on Eric Liddell. I wonder what drew you to the person and the character and the story of Eric Liddell.
Eric Liddell was my very first book. I wasn't long out of university. In fact, she said hurriedly, I just started as a trainee reporter on the Scotsman, and to be honest, I hadn't heard of Eric Liddell, but I had a good friend at university who's now a very eminent professor of theology, but he was studying at New College at the time, and he'd heard of Eric Liddell, and he came bouncing into my flat one afternoon, and he said, Sally, he said, I've just heard that there's a film coming out soon called Chariots of Fire. And he said, it's all about this chap, Eric Liddell. And he said, I know about this Eric Liddell. I've read about him through a book by a chap called D.P. Thompson. And he said he's a terrific story, terrific Scot. This film is going to be dealing with the fact that he, refused to run on a Sunday for all the reasons that we now know. But he said he had a very interesting life in China after that as a missionary. He said, somebody should be writing this book. How about you, Sally? I mean, it was literally like that. And I said, I don't know how to go about writing a book or getting something published, or, it does sound an interesting story. But he said, well, I'll see what I can do. And he basically found me an agent who found a publisher who said, well, this is obviously an interesting story. 20th Century Fox are doing a huge film, but that film's coming out in 10 weeks' time. If we want to publish a book, we're going to have it kind of now. And they gave me 6 weeks to research and write this book. And do you know what? I think if I had known any more if I had been a bit more experienced, I would have said it was absolutely no chance. It was a daft. But because I was so naive, I thought, well, you know what? It's only a bit longer than a long feature article. I'll do it as a piece of journalism. And I raced around the country. And my sister was also in Edinburgh at that time, so she helped me, and we were fortunate. And it was a lovely time where Eric Liddell himself died in 1945, but his sister was still living. His wife was still living in Canada. I didn't have time to go to Canada, but I had a lovely phone call with her. There were a number of people who were part of that era that I could actually speak to and begin to build a picture of this man. And then I had to start writing. And it was very clear very quickly that there was no way I could write a book, by myself in that time. And I kind of sobbed down the phone to, actually, it was to my father. He was asking me how it was going on. I was saying, it's terrible. I'm not going to be able to finish this. I don't know what to do. I've got so much information. I've got to corral it and organize it, and then try and write well through it. And I just can't do this. And he uttered the immortal words that every child really wants to hear. And I did feel like a child at that time. Come home. Just come home, and we will help you. And I came home with all my notes and all my books, and the whole family joined in. And my father, he knew and was very interested in sporting sort of statistics and records and all that sort of thing. So he supplied, looked up all these books. We didn't have Google at that time, but he had quite a lot of books that were useful. He did that bit of it, and one sister was investigating the history of the Olympics, and my mother was in the kitchen researching Japanese war techniques, and I sat in the middle of this hub writing and being fed, research, and we got it done. And sorry, it's a very long answer, but it's kind of etched on my memory.
It's a great story, and I think what makes him stand out, it seems to be fewer people nowadays who have got such conviction and are willing to stand on it, and so I think we continue to be impressed by him. Sally, you mentioned your mother there. Of course, she had a career of her own, not as well known as your dad per se, but certainly she had her own career. Those of us who have read your book will know how much you treasured your mum. Now, I want to go on and ask you about dementia and how it affected you all, but why don't we just begin with you telling us a wee bit about who your mum was?
Oh, my mum was wonderful. I always used to think, even as quite a young child, that I had been amazingly blessed by having this wonderful mother. And she was a very vibrant personality, clever in an understated sort of way, a great sense of humor, and a lovely writer. And she was just a wonderful person to have around, and we were very good friends. And I lost a brother, and she lost my the second youngest of her children when he was only 11 years old, and I was just a few years older than that, and that formed a very deep bond between us, which was something beyond the mother-daughter relationship. It's hard to put into words, but she was very, very precious to me. And I think I was thinking just in the car this morning coming in to do this, that it was probably 20 years ago now. It was around the turn of the millennium. She was in her early 70s when I just began to notice things changing a little bit with her, an absence of some of the things that made her so herself, an absence of curiosity, of vagueness, just small things at first. And the process of realizing that this was dementia, and then accompanying her on what was a very ultimately very difficult journey. I mean, that took about 12 years from. I mean, she died in 2012. So it was a hard thing to see somebody that you loved that much going through. But she also taught me a lot in the process, and I think I learned a lot about loving, and about what matters in life, and about what the essence of a person's being is when you strip away almost everything around about it.
You say in the preface, Sally, to your book that dementia changed her, which was obvious enough, no doubt. but you also say it changed you and those who loved her. I think you were beginning to touch on that. Could maybe you just unpack that a little more, how it changed you as a person and your view of those around you?
Well, anybody whose life has been touched by this illness will know that it is not just the person who is living with dementia who's affected. It's the whole family. I knew really nothing about it before, except I had an aunt who had gone through it, and so I knew a little bit, but I hadn't realized what it does to a family. And I mean, it's quite difficult to unpack, because it's a long process, but so much of what it does to you, it's such a lonely process. It's a process where all the ways in which you think or hope that you would respond to a situation, patiently, graciously, always with time and thoughtfulness, and all these things that you optimistically assume about your own character, are challenged, I think, and they are the fact that you are not able to be as patient and as even tempered as I was going to say loving, but it's not actually about love. It's about your ability to deal with the same things said over and over and over again, or unwarranted accusations that come out of nowhere because you don't understand that person who is saying you never ever do anything for me, has forgotten what you were doing for her half an hour before, and it was compounded by how little I understood about the illness of dementia, just how little I understood about what it is doing to the brain, and how hard it actually was at the same time for my mother herself. And I wrote the book really to try and help myself to understand. There was both a literary and imaginative exercise there, where I wanted to use words to hold on to her because she was changing, and I just wanted to describe everything that I loved about her and saw going away. But I also at the same time wanted to try and do a sort of journalistic exercise by which I found out, what Alzheimer's is, what dementia is, the fact that Alzheimer's is one of the dementias. When historically, when we understood what these these conditions were, how they affect the brain, whether it's genetic, all these things, and then later on I was exploring why it is that our social structures and our political structures and our medical understanding all seemed so inadequate to what we were going through, and why was it that we had to feel so alone, and why was it that the people who are the closest to folk who are suffering this were the last people to be asked what they thought should be done here, why it was so medicalized, why just because there isn't a drug that can help, it was declared that there was nothing more that could be done. All these things. I mean, a lot of it is better now, and I hope maybe my book and the charity that I founded have helped towards a little bit more understanding. But I think that was all part of it for me. It's a rather incoherent answer because, to be honest, it was an incoherent time. Yeah. But I think anybody who has gone through that will sort of understand how messy it all is, and how inadequate you feel so much of the time.
Yeah, I hear you, Sally. You used the phrase a little while back, the essence of a life. What's there?
Mm.
That's difficult, isn't it? Because we tend to measure people almost by their productivity. What do they do? What do they contribute? And when that's not there, and then when a person is no longer recognizing you, and when memory has gone, um, what's left? And yet, I know from my own part, I very much believe that every one of us is made in the image of God, and that continues regardless. So, would you maybe say a wee bit more about that, the essence of life, and how you continue to relate to your mum and understand who she was despite what was going on?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it was quite a sort of struggle for me to understand what was, I mean, what is left when you strip away somebody's memory, for instance. If you don't have a memory, what is it that you're left with, and then what are your, how does that affect your relationships and so on. And I mean, even to the point of the the Christian faith. I examined this with a professor in my book. Um, so much of the I think I'm right in saying, and you can correct me here, but perhaps more the Protestant understanding of faith is about an articulation of accepting a proposition. Mm. I believe. It's a somewhat intellectual thing, or it can be. What is it? I mean, what does somebody do if they cannot even articulate whether they believe or not? All these things I began to kind of inspect, and what I realized, or what helped me in the end, was the understanding that on the faith side of it, you would say that uh, God holds her rather than she is responsible for, as it were, holding herself towards him. But also, I hold her memories for her. I hold her essence for her. If she can't, if she can't be what she is and what she wants to be. And that was a great moment of almost epiphany for me. There was one Christmas night, Christmas Eve, is when we celebrate Christmas in our house, the Icelandic Christmas, and she wasn't joining us this time because it was in fact her last Christmas, and she was finding things very difficult. But I went to see her, and she didn't know who I was for the first time. Really, she didn't know who I was, and she was hostile. And I drove back home in absolute floods of tears. I just thought, I can't deal with this. This is so not her. How can this be the same person? And I went home. We had our family Christmas Eve, and then after everybody had gone to bed, I got out a letter that she had sent me a little while after actually a few years after my brother had died, but she was reflecting back on it, and she said she just wanted me to know how much my support to her had meant at that time, how much she loved me, how it was just so different from what I had just gone through, and I can't I can't put these things together. And I went up then to see my children, who'd all gone to bed, and they were all sleeping, and some of them were too old for me to be doing this. But I went into all their bedrooms and I kissed them one by one. And I sort of said to them in my head, I love you, and this is me. This is me loving you, and this is the essence of me right now. And I thought, yes, that's the same with her. That is the essence of her. That letter was the essence of her. And if I'm telling my children now, even though they can't hear me, that this is me and this will always be me, and don't you ever think that if I tell you I don't know who you are and say something rude to you, don't you ever think that that's your mother talking. And I realized that was the same for her, and that what I could do for her was to hold that, and to hold that as a precious pearl in my hand. That pearl was her and her love, which would not change, even if she couldn't articulate it, and even if in fact she articulated the exact opposite. And it was great. And in fact, you know, as I recount in the book, the next day I went back, Christmas Day, went back to see her, and she said, "Oh, yeah, more or less, hello, Sally," you know, because these things, you know, it changes from day to day, and it was fine after that. So that, I mean, it's not a very theological or philosophical answer, but it was the thing that after that helped me to feel that I could understand. And when it came to the point, which you probably want to ask me about the Playlist for Life charity, that was about allowing me to continue to hold her through music. And that's what we can do for anybody, is to offer back to them the music that connects them to themselves. So it's all about community. It's all about what is the real meaning of community. The real meaning of community is that we hold each other, and we hold them in extremis all the time.
I absolutely am going to ask you about that, Sally. But first of all, just let me thank you for the answer you've just given. You said it was neither philosophical nor theological. I think it was more important than that. And actually, it will have spoken to many, many folks, I'm sure, who know this situation. And you put it so beautifully when you said you discovered that you are now holding your mum's memories. You are now holding her essence. And that really spoke loudly. You're right. We too often intellectualize things within the Christian faith. I remember at one point we had a woman in our church with learning difficulties, and someone said to me, "But how can she take communion when she won't understand what's going on?" And I said, "Do you understand? I mean, do you understand? Can you spell it out exactly intellectually, or is it experiential as well?" So that takes me on to this. As a minister, Sally, many times, of course, through the years, I've been in care homes. We've led services. Many folks gathered there with dementia. And at times you've wondered, gosh, are they hearing anything? Is anything making sense? Is anything going in? And then we start to sing a familiar old hymn, something like, "What a friend we have in Jesus." And all of a sudden, those folks who seemed to be quite oblivious to what was going on begin to hum the tune or even sing the words. That's taught me about the depth of music. So, yes, tell us, please, about Playlist for Life.
Playlist for Life grew out of that very same experience with my mother. My mother had always been a great singer. When I say that, I don't mean she had any professional pretensions, but she had a lovely singing voice and an ability to harmonize instinctively with absolutely anything, which made any song rather more beautiful than it would have been, you know, if you were just belting out a number. And she knew all the, you know, not just hymns, but all the sort of radio songs that were on the radio in the 30s, or Scottish melodies, the stuff that we would all sing at Hogmanay, all these sort of things. She knew them very well, and she knew them word for word. And they were a part of our family tradition. Anytime we got together for a knees up, and as her dementia progressed, it was more and more obvious that singing with her could perk her up, or could indeed soothe her, calm her down if she was feeling frightened, or even in the bath, we began to realize that because there was a certain stage where normal familiar routines became frightening, as she became less and less able to understand why they were being done. So this idea of suddenly, as it were, being placed in water, what are you doing? And she would get very kind of upset, and they discovered that you just needed to start singing to her before the bath, actually. And as you were taking your clothes off, it's a lovely day tomorrow. Tomorrow is a lovely day. And as soon as that became her bath song, and she so associated that with happy times and calm times, that it just made the whole process of something that was difficult and frightening more easy. And I didn't have time then really to investigate beyond that, but we began to just more and more sing to her as a means of communication, but also as a means of making the everyday tasks easier. I always remember taking, she wouldn't mind me telling you this because she was so self-deprecating and funny about everything, but going to the toilet, that was difficult. But we'd go there, and I began to realize the songs and the Sound of Music was perfect for toileting. So, you'd be going in and say, right, Mum, pants down. The hills are alive with the sound of music. Come on, pants down. Yeah. And it was hilarious, actually, but it worked. It worked, and it would turn a rather fraught experience into something that we both enjoyed. And so, to cut a long story short, after she died, and I was writing or completing the writing of my book, I thought I must just look into the scientific basis for this. I mean, were we just kind of lucky with my mum, or is this a universal phenomenon that could help others? And I went to New York. I talked to the lead music therapist there, who worked with Dr. Oliver Sacks, who was already beginning to discover the impact of music on the brain. And I basically discovered it was a universal phenomenon, and it was something that they had discovered was immensely helpful in looking after people with dementia. And there was a chap also in New York who was beginning to introduce personal music into care homes via digital devices, iPods and so on. And I asked him if there was anybody doing this in Britain, because I said, I'd like to get involved with this. I think this is fantastic. And he said, no, not as far as I know. He said 1 or 2 people have asked me, but it's not being done there. So I thought, right, I'll do that. I'll see if I can get this going, because I just thought I had to tell people this. Music had helped, and it could help. And there's so little else that you can genuinely say of almost any intervention that it helps dementia, and this did. And so I started the charity Playlist for Life.
Thank you, Sally. Well, I know you'll have plenty else on your schedule, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to thank you because you've been so open and honest today. But I want to thank you too for your writing and for Playlist for Life, and for all almost the campaigning work that you've done. I think you have helped us as a nation to better understand, and I hope to better respond and truly to value people for who they are in their essence. So thank you, Sally, for all of that. I wonder if there's just one last thing you might want to say that would be an encouragement. Maybe there's somebody right now who's struggling, coming to terms with this fact that their loved one is going there or has gone there. Is there one word of encouragement you would give to such a person?
I would say there can be periods of great joy as well as sadness in all this, and that if you try and understand as much as possible about what this person is likely to be going through, as you would with any illness, once you understand, it's much easier to respond. But don't think that you have lost that person. That person is not lost. That person's there. And actually, something like music, which is such a deep and profound part of ourselves and connects us to the very deepest parts of ourselves, can make the connection that you desperately want to retain with that person, can make it very real. So go and make a playlist. Try and find as many pieces of music as you can that have been meaningful to this person in the past. Doesn't matter whether it's on an iPhone or a CD, or if you're just going to sing it, but introduce music that has mattered to that person. Introduce it again, and you will see, as you said, Martin, as you said, you saw in the care home, you will see fingers tapping and joy returning to a face that sometimes has become unhappy. And the earlier you can do that, the better. But there are lots of good times ahead. Don't despair. There's love and there's happiness and there's joy to come.
Well, thank you, Sally. That's so helpful to finish with. Thank you for that encouragement. I want to thank you for coming on this fair question. I hope you found the questions to be fair, that your answers have been wonderful and will be...
You'll be taking over my job soon.
Any others? Well, I'm not sure. I want to wish you well, Sally, in your work and in life more generally, and to say thank you for sharing with me today. Sally, thank you.
Thanks very much.